I'm Jeremy from the MyBallance team. And in this video, we're going to cover off some of the more advanced tools in the new mapping experience in MyBallance. So in this particular case, I'm going to start off with editing this paddock I created in the basic editing video. In this case, I want to drag out this paddock and extend it all the way out to the end. So just a reminder, as per the previous video, if I click on a larger point, I'm moving an existing point in the boundary, whereas if I click on one of these smaller points, like this one here, I'm actually adding new points into your boundary. So if you want to add or extend or make your boundary more complex, you can add more points by just clicking on the smaller dots, whereas if you click on one of the larger dots, it's actually going to move the whole fence line. As with the previous video, you've still got this advanced editing tool menu here, and one of the tools you can turn on and off is the guides tool, or snapping. By turning that off, what that means is you'll no longer get indications of things that are right angles or snapping to other features or anything like that. That can make it easier if you're just wanting to freehand draw a shape without having to have indications of angle and direction. So now that I'm happy with that shape, I've cleaned up that river boundary, I'm going to click save on that. The next thing I want to do with this paddock is I now want to add some fence lines to it. So obviously with the changes I've made, I've now got this little bit up here that it's a whole separate paddock and it doesn't need to be joined. So to do that, you just go add fence line to this paddock, and then you need to draw a line that starts outside the paddock and finishes outside the paddock. And that'll basically divide it into two. You can see as you've divided it into two, it's given you the areas, saying this area down below is 21.5 hectares versus the bit that I've just split off as 1.25 hectares. I can also, just like editing a paddock, move things around to change the shape and add points to the boundary, everything like that. So all those tools are still available to you. When I click apply fence line, that change is saved. And so we can now see the paddock has been split into two. With that new paddock, I can now go in and edit it the same as any other paddock in the system. But I can also go ahead and start to do things like create an overlap here. So what we can see is when I've created that overlap, the adjacent paddock has been highlighted in red, and it's telling me in the messaging down the bottom that creating an overlap like this will adjust the shape of the unnamed paddock adjacent to it. So those messages can be really helpful. It's worth looking out for them because they'll tell you if there's any issues or any things that are going to change when you save that. So when I click save, we'll find that the overlap will have been created and it will have actually cut it out of the adjacent paddock. And I can do the same in reverse. So if I click on this paddock, I can go ahead and drag it back, and it will give me the same message down the bottom, and when I click save, it's gone back to a nice straight boundary. The other feature we can use here is I may decide, actually no, I do want to make it one big paddock, and so I can use the combine paddocks tool to do that. So when I click combine paddocks, you can see the main paddock that I started with is selected in green, and any selectable paddocks are highlighted in blue. So in this case, we can see here that I can click on this paddock. When I click on it, it highlights in blue again, and I get a message telling us that when combining paddocks, they must share a fence line. So because these two share a fence line, I was able to combine them. On the other side of the road, where there's a gap, I can't combine with paddocks like calf 1, 2, and 3 because they're not sharing a fence line. So when I click combine selected, again, everything merges together and we have one paddock out the other end. Another advanced tool we've introduced in this new paddock tool is the creating a pivot-based paddock. So what I can do is I can click on a location and drag out a circle to create a pivot. Obviously, this is a very large pivot in this example, probably not realistic, but this gives an indication of that tool. Once you've saved that pivot, you can then go and use every other tool with that particular feature. So when I select it, I can go and add a fence line, for example, and split it in half. So we can see here now I've got half a pivot, and you can use the same tools to then go and divide things up and turn it into a realistic paddock map for your farm. Thank you for your time and have a great day. Cheers.